after witnessing 2 successful critique rooms last year. So to give you a brief introduction of NASA India, so we started off in 1957 with 7 founding colleges who just came together to share ideas, have a mutual learning process. So back then it was just, it started off as a movement, but later on a lot of other colleges started joining, and right now we are associated with over 65,000 plus students all over India, and we're very proud of that. And also that in 1993 we officially registered with the Government of India under the society as NASA India, and therefore that is celebrated as NASA India Founding Day. So every year we try to celebrate this event where we give back to the city, and we have a lot of our students who have come together and they're doing a lot of plantation drives and other social events where they donate food, revamp orphanages, all of that. And as an event where we give back to the students, we are the week room of undergraduate thesis projects that we are discussing with architect Sameep and architect Shubhra, and we really look forward to a very successful session where we learn a lot and also enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you, Abhinya.
Thank you, sir.
And I'll straight go ahead to introduce the panelists today. Dear friends, Shubhra Raje and Sameep Padora. I'll first introduce Shubhra Raje to you all. We've known Shubhra for the past 30 years now, 3 decades, and we were at the CEPT campus as students. And one thing I can say over the years of interacting with Shubhra, debating on architectural issues, that she's one of the most incisive architectural and relevant architectural critiques in the country. And so after she finished at the CEPT campus, she went on to do a master's at Cornell University on a scholarship. She also taught there, after which she went to teach at the University of Colorado, Denver, and Boulder campuses. She's conducted several lectures and seminars across the country and internationally. She is also founding member of the founding member of the Anant Raje Foundation, which also talks about cross-disciplinary initiatives in the field of art and architecture. She's also part of several various community arts organizations in India and the US. So thanks for accepting this, Shubhra. We welcome you again and hope we have a fruitful session. Our second guest and panelist, Sameep Padora, a friend. I've known Sameep, we've known him for 25 years now, and I remember we used to meet at UDRI lectures when we were just finished out of architecture, undergrad. Sameep had finished from Academy of Architecture in Mumbai. And I remember Sameep as a perfectionist even then and even now. I'll give you an example because he was looking for a master's program and he went across to several of the colleges in the US to identify which was the right program for him. And I thought, this is a perfectionist. He really...
We also, Shantanu, besides UDRI lectures, we used to also meet at Dosa Diner. Huh?
Of course. And I remember finally he did finalize on Harvard, where he finished his master's from Harvard. And I'll tell you a little more about his practice. Their studio's approach is to look at context as a repository of latent resources, connecting processes with networks of materials and skill. The practice has in the past received the Wallpaper Design Award, the Beasley Architecture Prize, Wienerberger Brick Award, Arc Daily Building of the Year, Wallpaper Design Award, and 2 AR awards. Sameep's studio also has engaged in a non-profit called the SPAR. It researches on urbanization in India. And its publication on affordable housing in Mumbai has been published by NAI, and it's also exhibited at the Seoul Biennale in 2019. So, Sameep, welcome and thanks for accepting this. We hope to have a fruitful session with both of you all.
Thanks, Shantanu. It was lovely being here. I'm just here to actually listen to Shubhra's incisive critique, so I'm just here to learn as well. So, yeah.
Great. So students, y'all can take over now, guys. We've done our introductions and hopefully it's a fun session for everybody.
Yeah. Ar.critique can start off with your presentation.
Is my screen visible?
Yeah, it's visible. You can go ahead.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Arpit, and my thesis topic is adaptive use for urban ruins, for which the typology is cooling towers in Bathinda. And this is a small glimpse about what we're going to experience. So beyond 1975, there is a shift in power production technologies from oil, gas, coal. We are shifting to hydro and sustainable. So because of which some of the supporting infrastructures are getting abandoned. So the classic example is the Guru Nanak Dev thermal plant in Bathinda. So 2 years ago, it was shut down, and last year it was auctioned. But the curious point is the Punjab government decided not to demolish the 4 towers, saying that it's the landmark, it's how people are connected to it, it has a heritage value, and it adds to the city skyline. So, in 800-acre campus, I have chosen the 30 acres main land redevelopment zone and 4 120 meters high cooling towers. So if we compare the towers, the cooling tower is higher than the Statue of Liberty and the Qutub Minar and half of the Statue of Unity. So it's a grand scale, which I am using in the thesis. So my scope limits to creating a master plan, conceptualization of the 4 towers, and tailing of 1 tower. So for the case studies, so there were 3 cooling towers which were reused. One was as an amusement park, the second one was for the church memorial, and the third one was the visitor center, museum, and a garden. And then I also studied few shell structures and parabolic structures to understand services, light, and acoustics in parabola. And then from all of these, I got the possible zones of interventions inside the cooling towers. So this was a conditionally site in 2020, December. Within 3 months, they cleared off the central zone, no vegetation. They filled all the reservoirs and the green, but they're going to retain the green part and all the utility roads. These towers are easily seen from about 10-kilometer radius in the Bathinda. During my tour, I experienced that the people feel that the towers are part of their everyday life, but they're not giving them adequate respect. So they have the glazing, but then they have the banners or advertisements, wires come in the view of the cooling towers. So I need to activate my facades again and regain the lost respect for the towers. So this is the master plan. Now I'm going to show the context and the imageability of these towers. So at the right, there's a lake. This is the existing imageability. This is what I'm proposing. So during night, this is how it's going to be. And then in the south, there's a canal. And between the lake and my side, there's a ongoing railway line. In the south of my side, there is lush greenery from where we get dynamic views of the cooling towers. Beyond that, I have a high-density residential zone, which is of lower capital income. But the curious point of this is that every street has a vista towards the cooling towers. And these families have the habit of outdoor living. These are from the balconies and the terraces. And the next to the railway line, there's more low-density residential area, higher financial groups. Towers are seen only from the upper zones. So I need to activate my facades on this orientation so that people can get attracted to it and go into the site. And the north, there's a highway. Underneath the highway, the first zone is taken over by the slum dwellers. The proposal is to keep the zone as a part of the lakefront. And the second zone is abandoned, and I'm going to use it to create street parking for my zone. And these roads are abandoned. They are not in use anymore. This is the only entry to it, the checking point over here. I'm removing the checkpoints and creating an open loop for the city. And this south, there is a canal road, but there's no access. So I'm adding a steel bridge so that the people can move to and fro and reduces the journey about 1 kilometer. This is the present service entry and the service road. I modified the service road into forest corridors, food trucks, and loading bays according to my requirements. Then the parking systems, the first zone used to be a substation, the flat, no vegetation, nothing. So it was good for parking. The other zone used to be a warehouse. So both were excellent for the parkings. And then now coming the intervention. So there is a pedestrian walkway on the flyover. And the curious point is the height of the flyover is equal to the balcony of the cooling tower. So I'm adding a proposed bridge which connects the flyover towards the cooling towers. So these are the renders. The next, in the south part, there used to be a canal. So there's a canal. So I'm adding few bamboo bridges, which carries on the vistas of these streets, of these residential complexes, and also adding few pagdandis. It used to be there, but now enlarging them, modifying them, repeating them. Then at the railway line, for safe passage of the people, there used to be these conveyor belts to transfer the coal to the turbines. So I'm using these now to transfer people into my site. Now, in the thermal lake, there used to be an island which is abandoned right now because shutdown of the PSPCL plant. So it has excellent lighting, excellent landscaping views of the cooling tower. So I'm adding a ropeway bridge towards the topmost part of the cooling tower. So now people can access to the tower from above, access to my site from the top of the tower too. So this is we are coming from the access road. This is coming from the highway. We are taking the deck and going inside the site at the height of 10 meters. This is from the bamboo rope bridges. This is from the cable car, and this is from the travelators. And the end product of this whole 5 journeys is we see the central 4 falling cubes in the center. Which, okay, now we're coming to the zoning of the master plan. So the existing green patches are in 3 gradients. So the most dense one I've converted into an urban forest with wing decks. The second was more random and flush greenery that is used for public park, and the cooling tower is also part of it. And the third one was more symmetrical part of landscaping. So I've exploited this to create powerful vistas during entries. And then I've connected all of them to these pathways, and the junctions are the rings which were kind of part of the lower base of the cooling towers. Then added few contours and mounts to create drama into the landform. So these are few renders. So here we see linear trees, radial trees, random trees, and more dense trees. So now coming to the southern part. So the first zone is just a slabs and parasol roof for the people with the lower economic people for weekly markets or organic markets. The second zone is a booth market. So there's a hierarchy of markets. So over here, I had the intention to make it more dynamic, more activated at all the time, so the people can come here, they don't get bored. So there are curves in the landscaping or the roller coaster in the air, so that it never gets bored. So then this part is the spine which connects everything. The entry is a V-shaped, a pergola supported by V-shaped column, just like the cooling towers. It has few setups like I Love Batinda, amphibial setup, dining setups. But the basic idea was that whatever is happening in the city, like there's a protest, there's pride, or there's march. So anything that's happening in the city can be resonated in this space. And then this purple space is area for the production. So this cooling tower is just retained as it is, just a green envelope is added to change the image of the tower. So whatever the HVAC electricity production has to be done, it can be done over here for the campus. And then the blue zone is for the sports, existing gaming facilities near the lake. Then some vernacular sports, I provide khali maidans for them. Then inside the tower, there are roller coaster, swimming pools, and all that. Then the orange is the central plaza, and the pink one is the market street. So some of the shops are removed so that it creates multiple access to in and out of the plaza. In the center of the plaza, there are 4 falling cubes. The idea was this, that something used to exist on this land, but it was destroyed, and now something new is being emerged from the ground, the new hope of development. So that is why I chose deconstructive type of forms for the plaza. Now, a green layer is added on top of the shops so that I get good views from the top of the cooling towers. Then a parasol roof was added so that the vendors, hawkers, or extensions during festivals that can take place easily. And then if you see at the section, there's a grade or increase of scale from shop to parasol to cube to enter the cooling tower and the tower itself. So there's a gradation or increase of scale, but if you're taking drastic turns, then the scale changes drastically, which fascinates the movement in the campus. Then the four cubes, the central one is just a diagram pipes, nothing else. So there, the niche I have my reception, then few multi-purpose hall dining setters. Bottom basement I have the food court, which act, and the diagrams act as a skylight for the basement. And then on the top I have my clubbing zones and the viewing decks. Then to enter the basement, there are these series of steps being created in a manner that it breaks vista. So when we are going down, we take turns and look at each of the four towers simultaneously. So this is the structural member and all the layers of the tower. And during night, the plaza, the four cubes, the light emerges, flows out of these four cubes. Then these are the views of how we are entering. And in the center of the atrium of the basement, the four cooling towers collide in the center. And then this is the plan at the 10-meter height. So there are travelators, there are balconies, there are forest desks. So this is how different towers are being connected. So this is the section. Okay, so now we are going inside the cooling towers. So I had developed few of these angular relation diagrams to understand the angles and heights which I'll be exploiting during design process. And then these were some of the studies, the structural members, temporary members, the services which I'm going to use and going to. Okay, so this is the hyperbolic elevators which are used to transfer loads in the cooling towers. This is how the cooling towers are broken if I want to trim it from the top and if I want to cut and make windows and doorways. Then this is the solar analysis inside the tower if it's broken, and this is at the basin. So the tower has about so the tower has about 8 feet deep basin where they store water. So this is the plan of that. And the shadows, how the shadows are helping me to sustain the harsh heat of Bathinda during summers on the plaza and the markets, the velocity, temperature, and the pressure. So it's constantly cooling down the cooling tower and the plaza and the markets nearby. And now we are going inside the first tower. From the plaza and the market, we just see a small canopy, glazing canopy hanging from the top. There is a curiosity that what exactly it is. But when we go near to it, that glazing becomes a full sphere, which is... Okay, just 1 minute. Okay, so this is what's going on in the first cooling tower. So there's a sphere hanging, and the structural reference was a tuned down dumpster. Then these are the plans. Then in the second cooling tower, there are a series of rings over the time, which grows into a vertical forest. And thank you. And after seeing this presentation, there's a feeling that these towers have the capacity to be something more, something which can change the cities drastically. So these precious infrastructure should not end in such a way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arpal, for your presentation. Ma'am, you can go ahead with the critiquing.
Shubhra,
okay. Samit, do you want to go first, or should I?
No, Shubhra, why don't you start?
Oh, okay. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Arpit. That was a very engaging presentation, especially because you're, obviously dealing with pretty spectacular forms and also the scale there was, and the program that you began to insert in it, one of the things that I appreciated was that you spent some time in the beginning to talk about maybe a park that connects all the 4 towers into perhaps a cohesive urban environment, maybe for Bhatinda. But while you were presenting, I could not help, in a sense, relating certain other significances and scales of engagement that isn't only to do with an infrastructure that now becomes a theme park. And where I'm going with this is, it's Bhatinda. Bhatinda is in Punjab, right? And Punjab's seat of governance in Chandigarh, where the main assembly is, has a direct sort of resonance, right? Because the architect there talked a lot about, infrastructure as sort of temples of democracy, etc., etc. So you can't help, in a sense, make relationships or linkages which have to do with the fact that for all these years, infrastructure necessarily, you only got to view it from outside as structures, because what was inside was electrical substations, etc., not accessible to public. Strangely, that also keeps happening in our governing systems, no? Even though there are places of democracy, representational democracy has gone to such an extent that our engagement with it has completely gone. So when we begin to engage with it again, my thought sort of goes to the fact that is leisure and entertainment, which is again very extractive. One could make an argument, just like for so many decades, our attitude to energy was extractive, which means you take, but you don't put anything back. And there I was wondering, having such strong resonances with a form and symbolic associations as well as real, that is there a way as architects today, can we think of public engagement as something other than consuming it for our entertainment? What I mean by that is, can we begin to think of programs that actually now allow us to engage and inhabit with structures, both in a way what you're doing is you're socializing infrastructure. So for instance, rather than it becoming yet another park or yet another theme park, actually, can it perhaps, let's say, reverse? Maybe these are ways in which you're recharging groundwater. In some ways, what I'm saying is, can we continue to extend programmatically the manner in which we re-inhabit, reimagine ruins, so that everything doesn't become heritage sites which just flatten, homogenize, use, everything becomes a resort of some sort, and the public continues to remain completely divorced from actually engaging with your history, with your legacies, etc. So I enjoyed your presentation a lot, very creative ways in which formally you have imagined how you would engage with it. But at a program level, it sort of falls into what the current imaginations, we are very limited, it seems, as architects. We can't think of any other ways of imagining programs other than tourism. And that is the only place where I thought, what might be other programs, even at an infrastructure level? For instance, where is this a project vis-a-vis, let's say, the general topography and geology of Bhatinda? Is it the lowest point? Is it the highest point? I don't know. But to engage with context and manners, that it helps us even in terms of this use doesn't become only effectual. I have this experience. And lastly, you might be interested, this approach business, no, is really critical. And this link with Corbusier, playing with Corbusier almost, you can't avoid in a project like this, because it's in Punjab, because it's these cooling towers. I don't know if you're familiar, but maybe after this discussion, you may want to go and read up that Corbusier had a very interesting typology. He imagined it for museums, but the point being, he called it the Museum of Infinite Growth, right? But the important thing about that was you entered a place and emerged from within, which means that after a certain distance, which you are very familiar with these electric cooling towers, you don't approach these buildings in a manner, let's say you would approach an office building or a housing colony, etc., etc. You dramatize it in such a way that your engagement with it now suddenly is all about, you almost start from within and then go off to the park and then back into Bhatinda. It's another way of, layering your project. I think Rahul Mehrotra talks about, when we are dealing with heritage, we are dealing with many layers of engagement. And this last layer of engagement is even problematizing, how do we approach something that up till now we are always used to approaching in a particular way, which is in a distance, you have the silhouette, which is very dramatic. But then if you keep approaching it the normal way, you are not using any architectural devices to make something first unfamiliar, then again familiarize it, then again make it unfamiliar, again familiarize it, so that your experience constantly is one which is both something you learn more, and it's not, again, just entertainment. You see what I'm saying? So it's just that your project had many, many scales, some of it you've engaged in very playful, very enjoyable ways. But there are these other links which are slightly deeper that also are waiting to be explored. So yeah, but thank you for your presentation.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, Shubhra. Sameep, would you like to say a few words on this project?
Yeah, Arpit, thanks for that. Sorry for the shaky video. It's the car's actually on the road, but it was a very interesting project. I really kind of find this as a fascinating opportunity to engage with the notion of history, the notion of artifact, the notion of technology as well, and the fact that we live in a world that's that while we seem to be moving forward, we're also making things obsolete. I think what's interesting about the project is that it tries to or it attempts to reimagine what infrastructure can be. That being said, I think a couple of points that I just want to kind of touch upon, and these are perhaps more kind of pragmatic, is the idea of the program, right? Like Shubhra mentioned it as well. And my kind of question really would be: is there a way to qualify the program that you're actually attempting to put on site, right? I mean, there is, when we look at infrastructure like these, like the project the site that you've picked, these are sites that at some point might have been very peripheral to the city, but have now with growth become much nearer to what the urban fabric is. And I'm just wondering if the program should be an outcome of trying to reintegrate this kind of infrastructure back into the city, and how do you actually suture it back in, not just plug it back. There's a kind of difference between the way that the project can engage with fabric. So that's one. So how do you qualify the program that you're actually looking at? The second point that I also have is I'm completely I have a bit of a bias. I'm a huge fan of structure, right? I mean, it's something that fascinates me tremendously, and these beautiful structures that you have in your project are really let's say an outcome of efficiencies, right? They're kind of exploring an efficiency of production. And I'm just wondering if there was a way for you to tie this tectonically back into the proposal that you had for your project. And I'm just wondering whether all of this really, the layers that Shubhra spoke about, whether all of this really actually, instead of becoming layered, is becoming really a set of disparate ideas that are just grouped together. And I think there is the kind of potential of this project becoming something far greater than just an amusement park or a kind of artifact. And it's something that could bring great value to the city if you kind of imagine it in a completely different way. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's very different from what Shubhra was saying. I think it's there is a kind of synergy between what she was saying and what I've just kind of tried to communicate as well. And I just think that if you were to just look at qualifying both the intervention and the program through this kind of critical lens, I think your project will be much more richer for it. So, but yeah, it was fantastic, and I'm the next time I'm in Batenda, I'm definitely going to go check this out. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Manisha, you want to say something since this was your birthplace, Bathinda? You want to take a shot at it?
Oh,
That I don't know.
You learn something new every day.
I haven't gone back since I was born there, so maybe it's
So
worth
you
going back for a
have
visit.
to visit Bathinda again. Like we said, these structures are fantastic. So, okay. So, I mean, I just want to say a couple of things. Great starting off with a project like these. These structures are now being questioned very heavily, and I think one of the ways of looking at it, I mean, you've taken on a process of visual choreography, and I think that as a method itself can be questioned. And what if you actually looked at it as an approach where it's an approach of ecological excellence, which is the counter argument to what actually has happened there. You talk about energy, being produced at a massive scale, and then when you question it, which direction would you go? I mean, if you looked at it as an approach where you look at ecological excellence and that actually starts allowing, I mean, it starts qualifying the project to then start a debate on what is the kind of program that you can bring there. So actually, if you lay a really strong foundation for a project that starts becoming a project where everybody says that this is a project that stands for the environment, I think it becomes easier to start bringing in program because it raises the discussion. So I think that approach, you lay a framework actually for program to come in, rather than be definitive of how you want to move people through and create that visual sort of extravaganza in this space, which is, I think it's these structures inevitably they're so powerful that it's a visual treat when you just go there with the scale and the mass, the way these forms sit there. It's already a treat, right? So I think it's this approach could give you an opportunity to decide very slowly, negotiatively, and it gives you more time actually, in finding, because when you overlay program very suddenly is very hard, because even an approach of ecology gives you a lot of time, and time is the only way to sometimes negotiate. So I don't know if I'm saying it in the right way, because a project like this needs time to figure out what you need to build there, and a cleansing approach gives you more time. You can't cleanse very quickly. Yeah. So I think that approach could be another approach.
Yes, it's. I suppose what you're talking about is otherwise everything still continues to remain synthesized. Everything is very synthetic in that sense.
And by that nature, sometimes if Bathinda decides to colonize this place into this, what we are looking at it as Disneyland, but right now I think your approach could have been this approach, but then when people take over, you don't know which direction it would go. So I'm just saying that could be your approach, and then how it gets used and colonized could be left to, that framework could allow for it to happen. Or it could go into other directions also. So I think that's could be an answer to.
The one thing that when Shantanu mentioned a certain ecological approach, etc., I was also reminded of why I sort of sometimes wrinkle my nose at only tourism as something that we seem to have degenerated a lot of our dealings with heritage in the past with, that's the only way we look at it. I was sort of wondering if we really seriously critically examine entertainment and spectacle, which these towers already provide, versus curiosity. So if you wanted to in some way dismantle, let's say, the tower, one tower, or you were saying removing something, or etc., instead of building scaffolding, if one tower you were to chip away half the concrete but leave all the steel reinforcement behind, suddenly it's almost like it's like a MRI scan or something. Your park is also explaining in a weird way how these things were built in the first place, one-on-one. And if you watch Discovery Channel, History Channel, Nat Geo, etc., cable channels, it's always interesting now when suddenly you were told how things work, how things were made, not just this is it and now we are going to take it over. And then all that concrete that you've dismantled to reveal something can be reused somewhere else, maybe in your park. But so suddenly programming processes, even of dismantling partially in order to reveal something, begin to inform decisions about what else is being built. And therefore, like Shantanu said, you're not just superimposing another program on it. But anyway, yeah.
Great, thank you, Arpit.
Thanks.
I thank you. I think you are on the crit room for the second time, if I'm
Yes,
not mistaken.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for sending your entry in. We can have the next.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Kaustav, you can press your screen.
Sure. Okay. Bina, just let me know once you start seeing my presentation, all right?
Yeah, sure.
Is this good?
Yeah, it's good. You can start.
Okay, I'll start then. Sure. Good evening, everybody whoever has joined in today, and all our panelists that have joined in today. My name is Kaustav Banerjee, and I'm going to be presenting my thesis topic, which I've titled as Remediating the Interface Between Landscape and Architecture, Expressing a City Center Building as a Public Space. And I really talk about expressing a city center building as public space, which raises the first question, that isn't a city center building already a public space? So that was the first question that I tried to answer through the course of this thesis. Now, this entire enterprise really began a semester ago before my thesis was supposed to be submitted. And it was a small dissertation research paper that I had undertaken that was critiquing and also studying the relationship between landscape design and architectural design as two diverse, connected yet diverse disciplines in terms of the professional divide that exists between the two, as well as the design processes that should be sort of holistic, but at times do not become holistic at all. And an exhaustive study into that entire area revealed a lot of values and criteria that one could follow to overcome those divides. Now, the images in this particular slide really talks about how there are these hard lines, and then there are these thick boundaries that exist between buildings and open spaces, streets, and the people who really inhabit these spaces. And when you look at a building, it really sits on a street which sits on a city, and in turn should belong to the entire city as well. But more often than not, it really sits as a hard edge and doesn't really interact with the street or even the people or the open spaces that are just adjacent to it. And could there be an interface that lets people cross over? Could the streets really enter the building? Could landscape enter the building? Could open spaces interact with buildings across? All of these ideas became the underlying principles behind the entire thesis. Now, applying these thoughts to a project or something that I could demonstrate and show was the next challenge through the course of the four months into which this entire idea was divided. And because this entire process and this entire project was undertaken in the midst of a raging global pandemic, the best thing I could do was really look for a building or a site within my hometown. And deliberately, I've chosen not to name my hometown here. I'm just going to start talking about and referring to it as an Indian industrial city. And everybody really knows the city is one of the only well-planned, strategically planned even cities of our country, and it's very famous for a steel industry. It's towards the west of India. So one really finds a shopping complex which is conveniently titled the city center, and it's also designed by one of the architects who's very famous in our country. And probably there were reasons because of which I chose not to name the architect or the building or the city, and maybe we could talk about it during the question and answer session. But this was how the narrative was built. And the aforementioned criteria that I spoke about, where landscape and architecture could perhaps interact, or the design processes could interact with each other, this building became a case where all of these things do not happen at all. So it does not interact with the landscape or the context that exists right adjacent to it, and are very rich. In fact, there's a smaller, very low-rise residential community right over here in front of the building, and a dense hillock with vegetation right behind it. And this sort of sits right in the middle of them and does not provide any opportunities for interaction between the two things. The next sort of idea was to model and both physically and digitally the entire precinct and see how the topography works, how the morphology of the site works, how there are different volumes of buildings work, how does the road layout work, how does the median and the vegetation in front of it work. And looking into it, it really revealed a lot of challenges that one could respond to. And I've really called this slide the context which demands a response, because the site in itself had such a rich context which the architect or the designers could have chosen to respond to, but they really didn't. And I'm really saying that because there's a steel industry that I spoke about very close to the west of the site. There's another huge mall of this stature being constructed right next to it. There's a low-rise residential community that I mentioned right in front of it, and there's this Goliath of a hillock right behind it. And there's also a river right next to it, not more than 500 meters away towards the west of the site. And there were schools and so many other public buildings that could have influenced or could have become a context which demand a response, but they don't really get a response. What you end up getting is this building, which frankly could be anywhere. The materials, the forms, for some reason or the other, it felt like it doesn't really belong here. And I say it because I've grown up in this city, and as a city which is predominantly low-rise, high-density, and also just because of the immediate context, this sort of sits like a monstrosity and doesn't really engage in conversation with the rest of the urbanity around. And these are some images which sort of begin to prove my point there. Now, these were vignettes of what one sees around the site, and these were photo montages of what one sees when they sort of look around a transect of the site. So you see there are these two roads of different widths, but of really fast moving traffic. There's this community, and the people really enter onto this road which has fast moving traffic. There's a median which is very wide and has a level difference, sort of slopes down and has a level difference of about 2.5 meters. And right behind this mall is where you find this landform or this natural piece of landscape. And this is the extent of the interaction that happens. So one really sits or stands over here, looks out of a window, and at times, just like this gentleman, choose not to look out as well. And that begs the question that is this the interaction that it gets, or can the interaction not just stop here, and can it be just much more than what it is right now? And these were the different questions that were investigated to express that interface or talk about what else could happen. So I was asking, can a building be designed like a public space or a plaza in itself? Can the thick line that exists between landscape and architecture be blurred? Can the typologies of cultures of market spaces like shopping mall culture or the street market culture, can they come together somehow? And can they not be designed as the stereotypes that are associated with it? And I have a theory that shopping malls today are really designed like prisons or casinos, and they sort of cut you off of the urbanity that's right around you for various reasons. And kind of mix and match of various typologies of these public spaces end up benefiting each other. And the next in line was really reading up about the and extensively studying and mapping the different factors that are present right around the site. So there are different typologies of buildings, cultural buildings, there are public buildings, there are schools, there are these residences, there's this industrial building right here, there's a river very close to the vicinity, there's a dense matrix of street vendors that exhibit sort of the area all around the urban precinct. And there's also a certain bit of visual pollution that comes up due to the different billboards that one sees that have been put up all across the median, and they cut off your view to the building as well, and then subsequently to the landform as well. So all of these factors became factors of influence that really influence the program as well, and also how traffic really moves around and how pedestrians move around. And that in turn influenced the program, which was divided into these 6 broader heads of spaces of initiation, spaces of trade, spaces for cuisine, spaces for amusement, art and literature, and services and movement. At present, the building does not offer a lot of these things. It just offers perhaps a movie theater and just a food court and a lot of shopping spaces. But the intention was to also provide anything else that I could think of: spaces for play, spaces for talking about art, for amusement, play spaces for people all around, and also bring forth the vendors that occupy the entire urban precinct within the site, and make this a public space that the entire precinct and the city at large could use and be proud of as well. And these were really drawings which became the datum for the entire thesis. And these were sketches which I ended up calling activity sections, or sections of chaos, or sections of informality. And I really call them that because our Indian cities and the Indian cities with the public spaces that exist in Indian cities always have these chaotic and informal setups that are sort of towards the verge of being extinct because of gentrification and so many other issues. And that was one idea that I wanted to retain throughout the end product of this project as well. These were some iterations of the site plan that came across after looking at the different functions. And I ended up with this final iteration of a site plan where one would re-enter from any of these points, and there were spaces where one could really sit around beneath trees and rest up before moving on. They don't really have to enter the site. If they want to, they could. If they don't want to, they could just sit here for some time and then walk around and go about the rest of their day. But once you choose to enter it, there were plazas which really initiated you into the city's history as well. There were spaces for literature, like a library that sort of happened over here towards the eastern side of the site, and it lets you wander off into the rest of the urbanity. The same thing happens over here with the amphitheater also. It sort of connects the entire transect together, and one could really use it as a space of thoroughfare through here, and they could either participate or look at one of the performances that's going on, or they could just use this as a seating area and then move out into and just enjoy the natural landscape that exists there. There were also these art galleries and cinema spaces that exist, and I tried to retain those. And once one moves towards the basement, there were functions that were interconnected. So the library really happened at two levels, the ground level as well as the basement level. The art gallery also connected to convention halls towards the basement. The amphitheater had these cafes and co-working spaces towards the basement. So all in all, this really became a site where many different functions could come together, which sort of pay tribute to public spaces of the past where there were so many different activities and not just infrastructure which people didn't know how to use as well. Another interesting idea was how one could inhabit the site or enter the site through a raised bridge level as well. and pedestrians could cross over, and these bridges could end up becoming not just really narrow pedestrian bridges, but really wide bridge plazas where different activities could end up happening as well. And this is what it would look like in context. I'm sort of done with my presentation. These are just images and plans of the individual blocks. I'll quickly run through it in the interest of time. These were images of how the development of the dining and fine dining and play area happened. And this is a section which really talks about the interaction that happens across different levels. Some vignettes and images of how the spaces would look like and how the material would work out, which was chosen because of the steel industry that really sits across. The library that works across 2 different levels and exploratory drawings that led to its design. So the ground floor really becomes an open space where one could sit around, use their cell phone or iPad and access different ebooks through their phones. Or if one prefers a traditional library setup, they could move towards the basement and have a different experience there as well. And this is how the section would there look like, where the gardens were designed as sunken gardens across the setbacks, and then they interacted with the building in different ways. These are images of how that would happen. And the art gallery, which was in itself designed like a sculpture, and these sketches were what really gave rise to that. And I was really imagining what would happen if Roberto Burle Marx and Oscar Niemeyer, sort of the way they designed and their proportions start to work together in an art gallery, what would happen there. And then one would really move towards a sort of flexible convention hall. And in section, this is how that entire interaction would happen. It would allow for light to come in. It would allow for people to look across and see the landform, get connected to the urban precinct as well. Some images of how those spaces interior-wise would look like. And quickly running through the amphitheater and the basement level sort of interact. These are some images of how those would be. And just ending the presentation, these were the cinema spaces on the ground floor, and towards the basement I had retained most of the market spaces that exist over there in terms of larger magnet stores, and a little bit smaller than that, about 50 square meters of smaller shop fronts, in addition to the different vendor spaces that were on the ground floor as well. And this is how that would happen in section. So people would, the building, the fall from the street, and then initiates them inside the site, and then they have a decision of what part of the site they want to inhabit. And that would be the end of my presentation. I'm sorry I took some more time, but this would be it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaustubh.
Thanks, Kaustubh. Thanks for the presentation. Sameep, would you like to take on this?
Yeah, sure. I'm good to go. Just interesting in the way that you actually frame the project. I'm not completely clear that I understand the motivations for you not to reveal the name of the city. Is that just to protect or just to kind of not talk about the specific architect who did the project, or is it some other reason? I'd really like to know at some point. The second question that I actually have for you, and I feel that while you actually make a very kind of nuanced and sensitive argument for what the site or the project that you kind of indicate, built on site lacks, I'm not completely sure I'm clear about the processes that you take on to actually mitigate whatever was in some sense done. So, for instance, if you were to talk about the site and its relation to context, the first thing, because of the fact that you also point out to that hill that actually sits adjacent to the site, is the fact that I would actually try to see if there is any possibility to extend the natural processes that operate within that landscape already. So I'm not completely sure if you're doing that, and if you are, then it didn't come through in your presentation. So that's one question that I have. The second question that I actually was kind of also interested in is the fact that you talk about the fact that you're operating in a site that's very close to steel manufacturing set of units. I'm not completely clear as to how that informs your project. Is there an understanding of a kind of material ecology, that these are systems of operation in the way that production happens? These are the raw materials that go in. There is this is the slag that's produced. I'm going to start looking at how to reuse that. I'm not sure how these multiple touch points that you actually speak about when you build a case for your project are actually finally imbibed within your proposal. Do you just want to expand on that? Would you like to respond to that?
Absolutely, sir. I would take the first question first about why I chose not to reveal the name of the architect.
Not the architect. I'm actually speaking about the city. I'm asking whether it's about not revealing the name of the architect.
It was. The idea was like the entire narrative of the project was in the beginning to partly retain some parts of the program and partly retain some parts of the building, and then try to change what's not really working in the site. That I did an extensive study of that through the course of the thesis as well. The problem happened when I wrote to the mall authorities as well as the architect's office, which is sort of advertised on their website, and I did not really get any responses from either of them. So I thought it would be just unprofessional to critique somebody's work without their consent. And just to sort of protect that, I chose not to reveal the names of the architect. And the minute I reveal the name of the city, it sort of reveals the name of the building as well. And it's just a chain. So that was just a conscious decision that I made. And that was upon the advice of my mentors as well. The second question that you asked about the process that sort of mitigate the programs. And like I mentioned before, a part of the process was to look at what were the different programs that currently exist on site. And I was also looking at scales of public spaces that the city lacks currently. So at the moment, there is no art gallery, there is no public building of this scale that one could go to. So there were so many of these public spaces that the city at large really lacked. And I introduced some of these programs into the site and tried to retain some of the other programs that were actually working upon interviewing the residents all around the site as well. So that's how different programs happened.
No, actually, sorry. Just to interrupt, my question was not about program specifically, but more so about the landscape. Since you actually kind of put that right in the beginning, the fact that landscape seems to be an operative word for your thesis. I was wondering if there was anything that you actually thought about the natural ecological processes that landscapes actually harbor, and if there was a way for you to actually, let's say, a very simple system, if there are already kind of water flows that operate on that, is there a way that you think wasn't clear in your presentation? I was talking about that ecological process, not so much about the program.
Sure, I get it. So there were attempts at sort of incorporating landform as well as the community, and I wanted to use this public space to connect that entire transect together. And the idea was really simple. I realized that it's a watershed and the water would sort of move in, and that became a dictating element within the design as well. So I had created these drainage channels so that the water would move in, and I had created these openings within the buildings so that one could, if not physically, then at least visually interact with the landform right behind. And the idea behind those bridges leading up to the landform was so that there could be a little bit of an interaction between the community, the public space, as well as the people who were using it with the landform. Not so much study was done into the ecological process that happened onto the landform. I couldn't really find a way of trying to incorporate that within the site. But then there were these smaller gardens that sort of connected through and through the community with the landform right behind. So that was how the process really became. I'm sorry I couldn't mention that in the presentation.
So actually, you know what? I mean, of course, there is this idea of a landscape as something that is to be viewed, but the landscape is also operative, right? I mean, it is something that works in particular ways that are let's say, implicit in the way that ecologies operate, and buildings, especially the ones the way that you actually described the building that you're investigating, seems to disrupt these natural systems, right? So just the fact that by by doing a garden, you might not necessarily, let's say, create or you might not remedy that disconnect. So it's really about how how these inserts that you actually do kind of create a means to extend that ecological fabric through your precinct. So that is one aspect. And the second question that I talked about, which was this idea of material ecology. I also bring that up because in the times that we live in, there is a need for us to become. I mean, it's clear with the way that we've expanded, how we've expounded our resources, that frugality is actually going to be an extremely critical way that we actually look at architecture or building or of any kind. And by kind of looking at material ecologies, I think that is a means for us to also start being able to offset, this kind of degradation, both of natural landscapes, but also of materials that we actually take to build. So that was the second aspect. Did you actually think about ways that these kind of productive systems could also be, let's say, harnessed to create an architecture that uses or reuses waste or methods that you could actually employ to build, which would be less harmful than typical buildings would be. So,
in all honesty, I did not do a lot of research into how that would work. But the idea of the steel industry existing very close to it, what really happens within the industry, and I studied how they work. They take care of their own waste. There was also a part of the question that you alluded to about the materiality being influenced on my design. So I was really looking at completely reimagining that entire site as if a building does not exist, because I did not get the permissions, and it would probably be a half-hearted approach if I could, without their consent, try to work with what works. And the idea would also be that if parts of this building were demolished, and how would those materials be used, and if I could retain just the structural aspects and break down the walls and try to use them as different plazas. These were ideas that I considered, but towards the end they didn't really work out.
Yeah, but you see, the thing is that when you actually start looking, the way that you're arguing for the project is really to only speak about it through this idea of people and building. These are not the only two forces that actually operate on that side.
Yes.
And it's I think when you build a critique for a particular project, for a particular context, I think it's very important for you to be able to also critically look at what you're suggesting as a means to qualify whether what you actually put forward addresses those first questions that you raised, right?
I understand.
So I think that's really my kind of suggestion for the project. Shubhra, over to you.
Ma'am, I can't hear you. You're on mute. If you could
unmute. Sorry.
Yes.
So a lot of the times these sort of discussions, since presumably your jury, your reviews, all that is over, right? And you are offering this project up in this forum so that we can all use your project as a vehicle to talk about certain other issues, right? So my crit is going to be extending from what Sameep left off, but in that spirit. I get it. Kaustubh, I may not necessarily only refer to what you have done, because I took note of the fact that you felt uncomfortable to critique somebody else's work. Where I'm going to go with this, Kaustubh, is that is actually, unfortunately, not happening enough in our profession. Would you agree that if you didn't know who the architect was, it is just context? That as soon as you or I or Sameep or Shantanu and Manisha or anybody else finishes building the building is part of the context?
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
So this project, just like the Patinda project, and I suspect many other projects that are going to be part of our landscape now of practice, we have to actually take these as opportunities in order to exert critique.
Yes.
Okay, because from that, we begin to learn what we shouldn't do.
Yeah.
Second, that therefore context just doesn't become a backdrop to then showcase our own creativity. You see what I understand?
Yes,
what
I do.
Sameep said, that
I do.
in that case, what you have built is just another version,
Right.
but within the same paradigm.
Yes, sure.
So I really felt that this project, in a sense, was an opportunity to exert critique on how we build and overbuild. What I mean by that is, most concrete frame projects in our time, whether they are speculative office buildings, speculative commercial private buildings, which are whether they are malls or whether they are offices or whether they are hotels, you would agree if they're made out of concrete, they basically are built on the principle of either post beam slab or slab post.
Yeah.
Which again, strangely, goes back to the historically to the domino system, right? Which is what all the other walls are actually you can remove, and what you remain is with this is the structure.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter who's built it. So that's the first thing. The second is, in doing that, your entire design process becomes a critique of how we build. Therefore, what you would remove, how much you would remove, take away, erase, or maybe shift slightly, is also a manner of suturing back the context. So it becomes actually an operation that begins to inform your design process. So the next time you do it, not this project, because, okay, you said your mentors also, I don't know who your mentors were, but encouraged you not to critique the building. I would say it's a wrong method for today's time, because the frugality that Sameep talks about, how do we know if we don't examine what our habits thus far are? So
Yes.
Currently what has happened, Kaustav, with your project is you have just erased, but built, okay, formally differently, but otherwise your assumptions were virtually the same as the building you erased. And that's where intellectually and as a manner of practice, your project has missed an opportunity, which is a very important opportunity in today's day and time.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
I chuckled a little bit when you said that you felt uncomfortable, because my entire studios currently that I'm teaching over the last 3-4 semesters, along with my friend and colleague, are about critiquing, in fact, iconic works of architecture, globally renowned, and then beginning to, through that critique, learning what we can do better.
I understand, ma'am.
You see? So that don't allow anyone to tell you, and definitely not the bloody architect who's built it himself or herself, that, oh, you cannot critique my building. Second, in order to understand the landscape, you kind of have to acknowledge the landscape you're part of, no? And throughout your presentation, one didn't see a complete contextual section, which actually was very evocative, which is road. First of all, it's a hilly site.
Yes.
There's going to be runoff.
Yes.
Now, is your building allowing the runoff, or does it dam the runoff? You will only be able to ascertain that first attitude of how you re-inhabit, or had you worked with erasures of the original building, where you erase, so that you allow landscape, water, maybe seasonal, to once again flow through, around, but suddenly your concerns now become beyond your plot boundary.
Yes.
And your plot allows certain larger processes, larger than your site, to pass through. in today's pandemic times, it's very interesting that even scientists were talking about immunity in two philosophical ways. One is an immunity which resists anything external to flow through you. It's a philosophy of fear. It is a philosophy of exclusion, even medically. And the other is you build immunity as only through engaging with the world, which means you are actually a little porous, you're actually a little dependent, you're actually a little vulnerable to things that are around you. And currently, because that sight boundary of yours was so definite, very stark black line, and the sections never ventured beyond that black line, you fail to acknowledge in your drawings a larger context. And if you don't draw, it doesn't go in, doesn't stay here, and then it doesn't become part of your thinking as you're working through the project. So two things in how you frame a design project.
I understand.
Okay, yeah. So.
Thank you, Shubhra and Sameep. That was really, it really clarifies the opportunities of this project and the promise it had, actually. I think the promise was in the questioning. You went through a rigorous process of questioning, and that set the project up. You also went through a process of, the initial diagram where you talked about the building and what the building, how there is an urban sort of precinct around, how it could engage with the building, and how should a building engage with people. You talked about the street, the people, and there is a natural environment around, and how that can become a part. Now, these are very, very pertinent questions based on the larger idea of architecture itself. And after you chose that site, the exercises that you did to bring in, let's say, how this landscape can become a part of your built environment, and how do people become a part of this built environment, and where do they come together so sectionally, and you started drawing this whole idea of section. I think there is a lot you could do with the project because it's very complex. You ask many questions.
Yes.
Let's say I would just take on one, for example, because there are many sections to this building, and one of the sections, for instance, if you looked at in the sort of subcontinent, when we build in a subcontinent, we look at how we as people use spaces. And for instance, what would you bury under the ground and what would you put above the ground? For instance, that one section where you're looking at spaces which are completely boxed off, that is your auditoriums.
Yes.
You have a raked floor, you have a raked ceiling that happens. If you bury that space under the ground, because it's going to be air conditioned, it's a theater, it's going to be air conditioned, it's going to be dark, and that raking of the floor becomes a landscape. So you have this opportunity of what we call accessibility and universal access into your site through that raking of the ceiling. And that raking of the ceiling has a kind of continuity into what you start making these fingers of these gyms, right? You
Yes.
start saying that this one program that people can start using. So, this idea of landscape, human beings use, if you bring these ideas together, you have to be very careful on not putting this, it's the very Western iconic, exactly the mistake of a person who designs a mall, an architect who designs a mall would use the raking very iconically and bring it out, to say that I create this canopy. We all know these strategic moves to make buildings iconic. But instead you put the market below, which would need more ventilation, cross ventilation. And I'm sure this is Jamshedpur and it's humid like hell, hot like hell, and you would need cross ventilation. So why wouldn't you think of something inversing this whole iconic idea of a mall, invert the idea, invert the section, invert the programs itself. So I'm just talking about one section, but if you went across these sections, there's so many opportunities that I think you missed. But the start, I think this project is about how you started. I really think it's about how you started. And over the years, I think you can develop this project, more, take this further, I guess.
So if I could just say something.
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
It's funny that you mention exactly that section where the auditoriums were at the bottom and what happens if the markets were on top. That's exactly how the process was. In the beginning, that was the option that I had presented. But then there were conversations, and those same arguments were the one I spoke about, that the thermal mass, it just makes sense to have a subterranean auditorium or a subterranean structure which needs a lot of air conditioning, because the earth itself.
So, Kaustubh, you were asked some very hard questions by the faculty and you buckled. That's what happened, right? It's okay.
Not even faculty. This was a practicing architect who told me that this is not according to rules.
The thing is, I agree with that thing. I honestly, I'm telling you the same question. We've been asked about the codes in Andhra. We've done a similar idea of an auditorium, 750 people it's underground. But what you need to do carefully is you bring the entry level above grade. You bury that part of the building. How you do it is the question.
Right.
Bylaws are bylaws. You and me can't change laws of the government, right?
Yes, absolutely.
When I say burying it, you can bury 10 meters above the ground. How do you feel buried? Do you feel burrowed?
Right.
I think the idea of burying doesn't mean below grade.
Right.
It could be anywhere. You construct ground. Ground is a construct of your mind.
Sure.
You can make it wherever you want. You had a hill next door. So the reference of the ground itself is changed.
Of course.
So please, when you are asked tough questions, you need to start using your grey matter more. I like tough questions. You need to be asked tough questions, but your answer should not be a weak one. That's all I'm trying to say.
I understand, sir.
Challenging question. You have to come up with the goods, right? So I think it's a great project. I mean, start to a project, but you could really take this further.
I agree, 100%. I agree with you.
Thanks, Kaustubh.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Sameep, sir.
Thanks, Kaustubh.
Next, we can have the next group.
So Has, you can go ahead.
Can you able to view the screen?
Yeah, we can put it in presentation. Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Suhas Ramesh Dhanrale from Ecology School of Architecture. I have done my undergraduate architectural thesis on variance of well-being with the help of my thesis guide, architect Nudra Legudekar. During the initial phase of research, I come across the fact that we spend 90% of our time indoors, and air pollution can be 100 times higher indoors than the outdoors. According to World Health Organization, we 30% of whom are sick building carriers, and sick building syndrome is a building related illness, and out of 82,000 chemicals, 80% don't have any primary health data. So the shelter is first seen as a safe space, but now is transforming into a sick trap. And well-being and indoor environment are becoming two sides of one coin. We often ignore one when looking at the other. And because of this situation, the white-collar workers are affecting very badly. And this situation is getting worse because of their job stress, poor indoor environmental quality, dull work environment, absence of their choice, and various other contributors. Due to such factors, sick building syndrome is getting prominent in lot of office spaces with the symptoms of headache, nausea, skin related diseases, inability to concentrate, etc.
So Has, can you speak a little louder?
Over the years, a lot of research has been done to prevent sick building syndrome from occurring. According to my understanding of the research, the best solution that as an architect we can provide is to establish human building relationship, like a healthy human to human relationship where human can connect with the building mentally, physically, and if we don't do it correctly, the user will establish a sense of disconnect between him and the building. And more on the scientific terms, over the past 1,000 years, our brain has evolved around a natural ecosystem, and it shows positive effects when we are in the natural ecosystem or surrounded by the nature, like reduced blood pressure, attentivity, overall happiness, and many other benefits. So as an architect, I'm just trying to create an opportunity to establish these connections using the highlighted parameters. And for that, I have chosen Bangalore as a site. My site is between Indiranagar and Whitefield, as they are the major commercial districts. The site is abutting to Mahadevpura Lake and falls on the ring road, which is connected by the major commercial district, which makes site more accessible to all other districts. My site is polygonal shaped with the existing large rain trees, which I will be incorporating in my design further. This is my main site cut plan. I have divided the plan through a central axis, and the axis further gets divided and user to allow the user to attract user attention towards the lake and the breakout area on the left. So for the explanation purposes, I have divided the site into four parts. First is my main building, then the smaller office spots, then cafeteria, and then breakout zone. So my building is 40-meter high and oriented towards northeast and southwest orientation to avoid direct sun. The second part of the site is office spots, which are 3-meter height and located at the dense existing trees. And the third is the lake, which is slightly disconnected from the office areas and more connected towards the breakout zones. And last is the breakout zone, which is abutting to the lake. And drop-off zones and entries are located on the service road of the 40-meter wide ring road. This is my this is my building's main entrance view. The total maximum built-up area that I get is 6,238 square meters, and total rentable area is around 4,000 square meters. This is the zoomed-in section of my main building, where the central axis divides the building into two parts, where I have given main pedestrian entry and second ramp towards the parking area. The central area it will central area act as a central area divides the user towards the different places. The waiting area is divided into outdoor and indoor spaces, and and I also incorporated days care public library facilities over the top. That will, if the user has a small children, so they will put their children on in the daycare. So further establishing the sense of safety and sense of comfort, as the user can see his child wherever he want to. So apart from ground floor, I have divided the remaining building into four different blocks. First is the corridor block, and remaining three are the office blocks with different height and different volumes to break the monotonous work environment and help user to change its indoor environment parameters according to the block. Second block is 34 square meters office block for 3 to 8 people, and third is the smaller block for 1 to 3 people. When I arranged the blocks and multiply to form a unit, the certain voids automatically get forms that will be converted into outdoor office spaces. After the service floor, building will get tilted towards the lake to maximize the lake view, and will increase the breakout zones and outdoor office areas. So all the floor plans I have designed in such a way and in a narrow fashion to maximize the daylight and the ventilation for the users. And the central lobby area will divide all the office spots and the circulation areas. This is the service floor, where the lift block remains unchanged, and the staircase block will slightly get tilted to serve above floors. Above floors are as same as below floors, with the extra uh, breakout and uh, breakout and working areas, outdoor working areas. So all the outdoor working areas I have distributed in such a way that it will be accessible from all the floors and all the users. And this is the zoomed in section of my breakout area where all the users from lobby or the adjacent office areas can establish the visual connection with nature and with surrounding people. For the and I have for the indoor outdoor office areas and lobby spaces, I have used different volumes to break the monotonous typology of the working spaces and attract the users when there is a change of space or change of volume in each and every office spaces, which also allow me to have the visual connect towards all of the site, including office spots and cafeterias in the link. So second part of the building is my pod areas, which I will be assembled with glued laminated timber on the site, as this is because this lies in center of the site where there is maximum vegetated area. Although all the pathways are covered for the rain protection for office spots, and the pathway and for the pathway I have designed the crisscross sections of glued laminated timber, which will create a sense of time for the user whenever he is going through a passage, by understanding the light quality and light direction, while the other blocks will be constructed with the different materials to give user a sense of uniqueness and sense of ownership towards their blocks. The third part of my site is the cafeteria area, which is slightly disconnected from the main office building through the existing vegetation and more connected towards the lake and the breakout zone, which will allow user to interact with nature and allow user to interact with nature and the breakout area. The last part of my design was the breakout zone, where I added extra trees and flowers with extra seasonal trees and flowers to give user a sense of time whenever the season changes. The space that he pursues will also be changed at certain season. At last, I think uh, my I think this quote will uh, better tell the story what I want to convey through my design and through my thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Suhas.
Thank you, sir.
Shubhra, would you like to take comment on the?
Should I go, or does Samit want to?
No. It's your turn.
Okay. Once again, thank you for your presentation, Suhas.
Thank you.
You have to forgive me. Every time I see a very well synthesized, seductive project that treats nature as something that lends beautification to our architecture, I sort of become a little subversive. And I begin thinking that normally we are taught as architects that our solutions are, these inevitable, well-synthesized renderings, of our imagination, an idea, where nothing contradicts, there are no paradoxes. And when our design process is that way, sometimes I feel we just continue to extend what is the current trend. And we don't look at certain other specificities of, let's say, Bangalore, that may, how would you say, present some spanners in our beautiful wheel of, then this will happen, then that will happen, and then very well harmonious environments will be presented. So as you were presenting, I was wondering that if we now, at least in this forum, look at your overall motivation of not building mechanically ventilated, sick buildings that don't cross-ventilate, right? That provide a continuum rather than contrast in terms of our architectural and spatial experience and inhabitation, blah, blah. But if we now add a little edge of criticality to our thinking, the first criticality that comes, that first sort of contradiction or paradox that I thought of was, I don't know about which city, which Bangalore you are looking at, but the Bangalore I'm looking at, the more open buildings are, you have other sub-natures that begin to interact with our buildings. What do I mean by that? As you need cross-ventilation, but with cross-ventilation comes ever-increasing pollution, smoke, noise, pigeons, monkeys, bats, etc., etc. I'm not using this lightly. I'm just saying these are also part of nature, right? By not even acknowledging them and always presenting nature as idyllic, as nature as picturesque, again, as a backdrop to serve our imagination, and that therefore not really engaging with the wilder aspects, with the inconveniences that these decisions bring with themselves, make us do the same thing over and over again, whether it's in Seattle, Bangalore, anywhere else, and don't in any way inform and bring uniqueness to our design solutions, right? And therefore, to go back to what Kaustubh said, this building looks like it can be anywhere. Second contradiction. So without acknowledging contradictions, our design trajectories just keep following what the profession already follows. The second one, when you have a lot of nature, which is a living ecosystem, along with it comes maintenance. Along with it comes detritus. You know, you have fallen leaves, you have all sorts of other manners of detritus. How does that begin to inform the decisions we are making? From a simple section of how water is collected, directed, etc., to how our lovely buildings are maintained. I don't know, during COVID, when I had to clean my own house, I began looking at built environment, our wall sections, our sectional assemblies with another filter, because now suddenly my body was inhabiting and interacting with the buildings in a very different way. I'm only bringing this into the fore because just like maintaining history, maintaining nature has its own ecology. It goes back to what Samit was saying in the last project. No? How do material systems begin to inform? And material systems is not just new building one time included in our walls. So your building, how does it age? If it is wanting to be like nature, how does it age? And how does it allow certain things to pass through it? Third contradiction, your lake view. You know Bangalore has a problematic relationship with its lake. If your site plan doesn't engage with at least a proposition that augments the lake and not just consume it visually, then suddenly your site plan becomes a proposition for something larger. So how are you handling water? As simple as that. And the last one is, how do we balance urban density with the other impetus we have, which is to maintain a sense of groundedness? So your certain sections, which were just ground floor office structures, almost like they were cabins in a resort, begin to become unrealistic. But not in terms of, hey, you don't know your function. it is that our imaginations are not fully embracing the constraints of our context. And therefore, we build what we want to build in service of our reputations of our creativity. Suhas is एक क्या sexy building बनाया है. In service of that, rather than in service of some larger needs that urban cities, specifically Bangalore, present to us through their constraints. So these would be my 4 inputs, which is not to say that all of you don't have skills. Yeah, you guys, everybody these days, skill to bahut hai hum sab mein, but we are, how do I put this politely? Sometimes we are too preoccupied with self-pleasure, where we are only preoccupied with what we want our buildings to be, rather than what our sites need. So anyway, so these would be the 4 or 5 contradictions that I was trying to articulate while you were presenting, just knowing very cursory what your site is. And if that helps, just so that your next project, it's not, you flesh out your questions a little more, push yourselves to ask beyond cross-ventilation, which is a good one, sick building syndrome. Don't jump to existing solutions. Push yourself a little further, that along with cross-ventilation, what are some of the problems I'm going to face? And then maybe the trajectories may be a little more critical. But
Thank you.
But thanks. Thanks. I enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you, Shubhra. Sameep?
Yeah, sure. So one thing that I'd like to say, that you can put a building together, right? I mean, I can see that you would be able to figure out how to get a building together, and there is absolutely nothing wrong in knowing how to do that, right? However, I think as a student project, and also as a means to maybe to look at yourself as an architect practicing finally, is to see if we can be more ambitious than that, right? To see if we can set a slightly higher standard for what we set out to achieve in a project. So like Shubhra said, cross-ventilation, right? Simple. I mean, it's something that you can actually think about in a project, and it comes with its own complications that you can also kind of think through. Like that, there are other aspects. You could take the tectonic of the building itself, right? You already tried to address it through the fact that, there are outdoor workspaces and all of that. But is there a means for us to use these new imaginations of work in a way to completely reimagine work itself, right? So can we start thinking about the idea that architecture is not just servicing a need, but it also creates a need to service the program itself, right? To rethink the program. So therein lies, I think, the ambition that you can pursue both in a project like you've done here, but also in the future. And I think the third aspect also just to say that some of those images that you were showing of the way that you were entering a building and all of that were, like Shubhra was saying, very, very seductive, right? I mean, there was an imagination at play there, and you could see that these could be articulated into expressions that one can almost imagine walking through oneself. So, like I'm saying, you can put a building together. But what is the other thing that you bring to the project that might not involve just resolving, let's say, program in a way that's been done in the past, but you're doing a little better maybe. So the other aspect, besides kind of rethinking program itself, is to also maybe look at systems. No, I mean, the fact that when you actually put buildings together, it's about putting systems in play. Whether it's circulation, like you were saying, that the circulation stays intact, whether it's ducts, whether it's just the building components, which involve both a building skin, a building core, and maybe what functions as substructure. Is there a way to rethink or to systemize your thinking about this when you actually think about a building? So even putting a building together involves let's say, resolving this idea of what the building is, not just the physical set of programs that are put together, right? So it's also the idea of a building. So yeah, I just my kind of let's say input on your project would be that while it's good to put a build, it's good to know how to put things together. It's also important for you to be able to push what the project can be, because what it appears to me in the way that I've seen the project is that you operated within what you know as a way of working. But what you really need to use these projects for is to find out things you don't. Right. So that's what I feel these projects provide that opportunity for. So I just think that if you take that approach to projects you're doing right now or in the future, you'll get much richer projects out of that process. Yeah. That's basically it.
Thanks, Amit. Suhas, I will just take a minute to tell you what I feel. I think first thing is, I won't critique you much on your project, but I'll ask you to look at Francis Duffy and his body of work on officing itself. He's written many books, and one of them is the most famous one is called The New Office, and I recommend it. I've used it as lots of us used it as a Bible. And what he talks about is the way office configures and comes together. That means different formats of work. That means a lawyer's office is very different from an office that does IT work, is very different from the one that does creative work, which is a ad agency of an architect, for instance. And he breaks it down very simply for you. Now, coming to the next point is actually you're looking at this office building as something that looks very much outward and how you want to respond to the outside. But if you looked at work itself from within, and that, again, taking from what Frank Duffy has to offer, I start looking at cohabitation and how people work together. That means there is always a relationship with the other, right? So if lawyers come together, what can they share? If people in IT come together, what is the resource they can share? So you start forming a community and you start looking at from within. And then maybe your plans of these slabs will be very deep, maybe, I don't know. I'm just saying that you need to also come from within, and and like you'll always say, but I don't know which office comes here. But you speculate and say, if it is an IT office, what is the kind of footprint I'll have? What is the scale I'm talking about? Then also growth. So I think you need to bring in parameters for yourself rather than say, I'll build a generic size of a slab which will bring me light and ventilation after 8 meters. Light is an issue, yeah, but then you figure out how you bring in light and ventilation, right? Ask more challenging questions. So I think I'll leave it at this. It's when you're looking at speculative offices, you need to push the boundaries of the envelope itself and how work itself is sort of transforming. I think these are challenging questions, but I would urge you to look at that. Thanks. They are nice drawings. You have the skill to draw, so thank you for those.
Thank you.
Next.
Yes, sir. So Harris is not able to join us, hence we'll be presenting a recorded video from us.
The last project.
Oh, it is the last. I was just going to say, could I just 2 minutes fix myself a quick cup of coffee?
Sure.
The last project that we can pull through.
Oh, yeah, okay. This is the last one, yeah?
Yeah, then we'll
and it's on 10 minutes because he's recorded it. So that.
Perfect. Okay. Let's do that.
He's done the clever thing. And we'll take you to Kashmir now, okay? So.
Good afternoon, all of you. My name is Haris Khan. I'm from Jamia Millia Islamia. My thesis topic is Stage 4 PTSD Survivors of Conflict. So now starting with what is a PTSD? PTSD is a mental disorder that is characterized by failure to recover after experiencing or witnessing a terrifying event like a sexual assault, bomb attack, surviving through a war, etc. What is the conflict region? A region that is characterized by a complex political, economic, social, and military transborder, which is happening with war and conflict. So wherever there is a war and conflict going on, there is a presence of PTSD symptoms in the urban population of that region. So my thesis is for those survivors of conflict which are affected by war and conflict in terms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Not talking about its existence, it has existed as long as the mankind has experienced trauma. There is a correlation between the PTSD and conflict in an urban space that can be stated as a post-traumatic urbanism, as the term PTSD and conflict cannot be seen in isolation. The graph is this is a graph which is showing that the top 10 conflicted region of 2020 that are affected by the post-traumatic urbanism. After classification, the Kashmir is selected for the thesis. Now in Kashmir, 19% of the population suffer, like 1 in 5 adults of the Kashmiri population suffer from PTSD, 45% of the population suffer from mental health disorder, and in their traumatic urbanism or in the public space, on an average, an adult has experienced or witnessed at least 7 traumatic events in their lifetime. In this slide, PTSD of an individual trauma is detailed out. Local knowledge of PTSD and problem of daily life and their coping strategies highlighted and listed out. We can conclude by this that cognitive symptom is not worthy of attention given. PTSD is higher among women than men. It is more in higher group and higher age group. People with poor education, divorced, widowed, or separated individual is more likely prone to PTSD. So these are the common symptoms that are found in every PTSD individual. Now the question arises: who are the PTSD survivors? How can one define and confront each and every PTSD survivor and decode the intervention for them? So we can say that there are there is many variety of survivors out there in a public space in Kashmir, and they have developed mental conflict over one another in their individual traumatic memory in Kashmir and in urban space also. That to challenge this, the PTSD survivor of Kashmir that are active in the public space has been listed out in relation to their traumatic urbanism and is analyzed, and the survivor is then category placed on a target group based on their collective traumatic experiences. So the selected target group are the transitional survivor, the half-wit survivor, the torture survivor, palliative transitional Jew, and armed force survivor. These are the final survivors that fall in the category and is finalized for the design intervention. Now which district has to be, out of the 10 districts in the Kashmir, which district has to be selected for the design intervention? So the prevalence of PTSD prevalence is high in Baramulla. We can say that the Baramulla is selected as the population suffer 25% of the adults suffer from PTSD there, and also due to its close proximity to line of control and probably the probable reason for its conflict, and also there is no psychiatric or mental health service there in the region. Now, talking about the site, this 20-acre site here is in Sopur village of Baramulla. The rationale for selecting a site there is due to the close proximity to the medical facilities, downtown, residential community, place of worship, graveyard, and also near the river Jhelum. And this 20-acre site is highly permeable, so that it can turn into position for a community. That the design space is not just a rehabilitation center or a mental health center, but rather it's not where just the patient are just detoxing, but rather it is more of an inclusive space where the site surrounding activities, historical fabric, vernacular, and topography is respected. And now coming to the next slide, in this slide, looking at the site with respect to the context, the traumatic urbanism, we can say the traumatic urbanism dominates the traumatic of an individual. Okay, in the design intervention, I've attempted to reverse this on the site by inducing cognitive therapy in individual traumatism of survivor in the form of built block, that is architecture, and in urban traumatism, that is landscape. Prolonged exposure therapy is induced. It can be explained in detail in the site plan. In the site plan, you can say that it is more in an equilibrium state after the induction of these two therapy in built block and landscape, hence dominating over the context. Now, explaining in detail here, the site plan, two entrances are given at the primary road, which is connecting the PTSD block here. Okay, the secondary entrance of the target group, which is here, is now connecting to the severe PTSD block. There is also a controlled privacy which is maintained between these two blocks, and the built block is acting as a cognitive therapy, and the landscape is placed in between those spaces of the built block in the form of prolonged exposure therapy. Now coming to the site section, built block and the landscape is attempted to be placed as a plugin, which should not go off with the context, hence balancing with the context in terms of vernaculism, landscape, color harmony, historical fabric, etc. Explaining the prolonged exposure therapy through narration. The first one is the trauma confront course, the course with the word traces and loss which confront the trauma of the survivor. The second is the mourning nature course. The space is reflecting the collective traumatic memory of survivors in terms on a commemorative wall. The third one is the acceptance, which is a cultural core. It is a kind of a social space for a community where they can come together and can share their common cultural identity in order to elevate the traumatic memory over one another. The fourth one is the reattachment. At the end, the survivor is subjected to a landscape where he is enforced to be a part of the therapeutic healing nature of the landscape. Now coming to this site view, now explaining the cognitive therapy of the built block. This one is here as a PTSD block, which is then categorically divided in different sets of blocks based on survivors categorization. This one is the community block and its landscape. That is the community space where the peace building, conflict resolution, and psychosocial program will take place. This one is the admin block where the different stakeholders are regulating the program on the site. This is a PTSD block here with a library, reading hall, classroom, cafe, and peer mentoring space. This block, this whole PTSD block is then connected to a transitional block here, and then this physiotherapy block is at the back end of these two blocks. Now coming to here, this block is the PTSD block where survivors suffer from the highest prevalence of PTSD. So this block is at the entrance is a treatment therapy and treatment block, which is then connected to the cafe peer mentoring space here and the occupational therapy here. Okay, then we have the landscape. We have the here U-shaped block here, which is a rehabilitation plus therapy block. Here is the half widow block that is surrounded by priority space and the women block here. And the women and half widow block have a common therapy block and a private space in between the block. And these last two blocks, the torture survivor and the massacre survivor, here have G+1 height with their landscape around them. So at the first floor of the target room, there is a survivor room given for a rehabilitation in all of the survivor blocks in order to alleviate their suffering and trauma. And after that, they can be reintegrated back into the society. Now, this one is the exploded view, which is highlighting the cognitive therapy of the build block as a color coding, which is highlighting the individual traumatism. And the dotted line marking the landscape of site, highlighting the prolonged exposure therapy and urban traumatism. And this one is the landscape plan of the ground floor. Now, coming to this is the landscape plan of the first floor. And then this is a size section and elevation, and this one is the structure, which is showing that the Jidiwari is used. Other construction material is used is the dark construction, the timber log, and the mixed use construction is incorporated for build structure. Then this is the render, which is a view from the main entrance pathway leading to the PTSD treatment block. Here you can see the community space and the community block. This one is the view from the community block, where you can see a psychosocial and conflict resolution activity is taking place. Now this one is the view from the community space, where you can see the community wall and other survivors block. This one is a view from the exterior space of PTSD treatment block, where you can see directly the community space and other social space. And this one is a view from PTSD treatment block, where this one is a torture survivor block, this one is a massacre survivor block, this one is a women and half widow block. Now this is the view from the terrace of the half widow block, where you can see that the activity is going on among the women. This one is a view from river along the river Jhelum. And now coming to the conclusion, the thesis aims to bind the survivors together in the form of a collective memory in an urban space without having any conflict over their personal traumatic memory. The multiple set of survivors suffering from PTSD were further classified based on their collective trauma, that is massacre survivor, torture survivor, armed force survivors, transitional youth, and combat survivor, armed force combat survivor. The survivor was then further classified based in PTSD block and severe PTSD block for rehabilitation, inducing cognitive therapy in its landscape, and cognitive therapy in its build block and prolonged exposure therapy in its landscape. The survivor in build block are dominating over the landscape, which is vice versa in its context. Thus an equilibrium is created over a complex web of mental conflict on the site, and where the peace building activity and the conflict resolution activity will take place. And we can say that the user after that will elevate their traumatic memory when they get back to their traumatic urbanism. So it will not affect them mentally after that. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if Haris Khan is with us, but we can discussion. He's listening to this on YouTube, so yeah. Shubhra, you want to go?
Maybe Samit can start.
Okay. No, so I think as you might know, some of you might know already, I'm also from Srinagar, right? So this is there are various aspects of memory that I connect, and there is maybe a little bit of my kind of personal connection that I should perhaps distance from my own kind of critique of the project. The first thing that I want to actually talk about is the fact that the site, is chosen by the Jhelum River, right? I mean, Kashmir, and Srinagar specifically, over the past few years has had this history of flooding, which has become extremely detrimental to fabric, to human life, economy, and so on and so forth. I think when we're actually building in such an area where there is already a well-documented kind of history of littoral that flux that causes damage, the project itself needs to sensitize to that, right? I mean, so that's the first kind of impression that I would have of the project. The second is, I've always kind of thought about, and I'm going to let my kind of personal interest also kind of maybe venture in here, that the architecture of Kashmir, and I remember this distinctly growing up, that when I lived in Branavari, when I went there to kind of live with my relatives, there used to be these wonderful kind of passages at the upper floors that would allow you to connect from one house to the other. So I go to my cousin, my aunt's house, which was across the street and across in another courtyard, just walking through these upper level connections that the entire project had. So that entire settlement had. And I used to love going to her room because she used to have a lot of books and I'd love reading. So it was just that access. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that there are architectural devices that exist within the architecture of the valley that haven't been explored at all. I would have loved actually, and obviously Harris has the skill from the drawings, that if we were able to actually pick on these to formulate an architecture that of course houses the program that he thinks is important, but is able to also build on a kind of repository of knowledge that already exists embedded within the fabric of the old city. We used to call some of these balconies dubs, where you actually, and some of them were called moon rooms and things like that. But all of this is just a faint memory now, and I don't think there is much about the architecture of old Srinagar. And I just feel that any thesis topic that actually talks about building in Srinagar must look at going back into the history of building there, not just through material like he's already done in this project, but also through the architectural devices that created a fabric that was extremely unique, that I haven't seen in other parts of the country as well. So I think two aspects of the project seem to need work. One is the impact of building right next to the Jhelum. And ways that you could mitigate flooding, which is now becoming extremely common in the valley. And second is this idea of the architectural type and the various devices, the architectural devices that exist within the old city, and now these can, in some sense, be reappropriated to create an architecture that's fairly that's unlike other architecture in other parts of the country. So yeah, these two things, and I'll kind of come back to speaking about things once we discuss this a little bit more. So.
Thank you, Samit. That was quite nice. Shubhra?
Yeah. First of all, thanks, Samit. I'm glad, because I knew you were familiar with the context and the landscape, because I think it's sort of, you learn as well and kind of maybe sort of at least, absorb some of the knowledge that you were talking about in terms of the context. The other thing, I think the other aspect to projects like these, which first of all, Harris, is it Harris or is it Zafar? But however, if you're listening, that these numbers are kind of shocking, no? When we talk about 25% traumatized, having seen 7, 8 incidences of trauma during one's life, etc., etc. I mean, just in terms of the people you're dealing with, the project is not just then about meeting functional requirements of a well-appointed, efficient clinic. the dimension to projects like these are perhaps also at an extremely empathetic human level. And by that, what I mean is, for instance, if you sort of make a correlation between the built world and just people meeting, then if one looks at a site plan like Harris's, you begin to wonder, are the buildings in his site even talking to one another? And it kind of goes back to what Samit was saying, that when you have cyclical circulation that lead from one place to the other, so that you don't have to keep going to the ground floor in order to go to the first floor again, that makes first floors disjuncted. But if you have two modes that sort of connect, another kind of sensibility emerges, where you can wonder without being constantly being told about where one must go. I don't know if those kind of environments which are a little softer in terms of telling you what to do, make for more empathetic environments. The second is, if you are dealing with the notion of erosion, both in landscape but also in terms of mental, it is not really rehabilitation that we are talking about. It is, you are evoking a sense of being held in place, a sort of a nurturing. So even in terms of, let's say, land now, which is constantly interacting with water in terms of being eroded, fluctuating, etc., etc., a dam suddenly, or some retaining structure, perhaps may be too severe, where you repel something rather than you allow transformation both ways. And in that, you begin to wonder, that coupled with what other tools do we have as people working with the built environment other than walls and columns? Can trees come into picture? And especially a place like Kashmir, because unlike walls and what we are usually used to, at least a place like Kashmir, and maybe Samit can correct me if I'm wrong, but you have 4 seasons. The trees and the nature of enclosure that trees provide change, so that you mark autumn and you mark winter and you mark spring and you mark summer differently, because now these building elements, which are various kinds of vegetation, are helping you create environments that fluctuate according to season. When you begin to think of elements that way and say, would those help in creating environments that are just places that allow you to feel a little calm, feel being held in place, a little more than 4 walls and a roof, no matter how crafted they are and how competently they are put together. And then what is the balance between needing winter shelter versus perhaps summer? You can maybe use rooms that are without roofs versus perhaps shelters that provide warmth. So suddenly the project becomes a completely different preoccupation of how you work with not just landscape in a generic way, but what are your architectural tools now? They're not just the ones we think are available to us. And lastly, when you do that, you create enclosures, especially if you really work with landscape as an equal and an equivalent way of making spaces, that you begin to look at enclosures that provide a boundedness without confinement as a balance to rooms with doors and with things that we are more used to. So again, it's a set of questions that begin actually with how do we deal with erosion of in terms of social fragmentation, in terms of landscape interacting. How have we dealt with erosion in terms of wanting to resist erosion versus allowing things to let us transform in our own ways, so that even getting better from PTSD is not just a linear way of going from one clinic to another clinic, taking medicines, and now you're rehabilitated into society, but somehow a little more empathetic way of even working with people who are traumatized, because everyone might need to heal in a different way. So erosion and healing become very evocative themes then for the project, whether it's of the physical environment, or whether it's the actual people who then inhabit, sort of cyclical. So there is a little element of poetics that one needs to get into for it to inform where our design trajectory goes. Yeah. I was a little moved by the statistics, though. It's just...
Yeah, I think we've received very interesting projects, and this one was in a one of those kind of projects which fits into that conflict zone, and I thought it would be interesting to discuss it. I just Samip, I'll hand it over to you for last comments on this project. But I just thought I'd take a perspective of Haris, if you're listening. If you took the perspective of looking at it clinically, that means I'm saying if you look at it from the science of hospitals, how would you look at it? What is trauma, and how do you stabilize trauma? One is the physical trauma that you go through. You deal with it very differently. But it's literally like looking at it as a room, which is an ER room, that you would resolve things in that manner. It's an emergency casualty kind of, but trauma is another level up from there. Then if you're looking at it psychologically, and the rehabilitation is very different. So you look at an architecture of healing then, and there are various sensibilities and senses that you involve a patient or the affected a person, which is sometimes about engagement, and how would that engagement be? Sometimes it's also about bringing, because there may be no trust, and you're using engagement with sometimes animals just to be because you're not sure. And there are various ways of therapies that have been evolved for this sort of affected people. And I think if you looked at those examples, then you could derive a better sort of literally like a program, I would say, because it's not only about blocks, but what are these blocks about? Are you being able to confine sometimes? Are you confined sometimes? Are you supposed to engage with people sometimes? Or is the therapy sometimes also physical, where you need to have some mobility exercises? And so these spaces could evolve along those lines. So I think look at it a little more clinically also, and then the architecture, then what Shubhra said would also sort of dovetail into what I was trying to say, the poetics of architecture. Of course, what Samip was saying was very interesting. He knows, he's dipped down memory lane to know. I've never been to Kashmir, so I can't comment much about Kashmir, but it seems to be like a lovely place. I'm sure we'll all be there sometime to meet you, Haris, if you're there. And Samip, maybe you're going to set this up for going there. Yeah, Samip, over to you.
No, man. I mean, it's I don't really have that much to add to that, to what I've said. But I'm really just thinking back about the nature of the project. In the sense that to make this a large complex or a large kind of set of large site, 20 acres is a massive site, right? And from what it looked like, the fabric around it was fairly intricate. It didn't feel like it was these big compounds. And I'm just wondering whether reintegration is something that requires that kind of distancing, or is it, or should the project be really smaller, let's say, kind of infills within the fabric, almost like these points of these little bits of these little inserts that actually allow you to find spaces to recover, not disconnected from the city. It's not. It's a part of your everyday. It's something that that you chance upon, or you kind of go to as a part of your daily routine, or even something that you can go to at a point during the day where you suddenly feel the effects of PTSD. And I'm just wondering whether the project really needs to rethink the way that it's positioned, maybe that might be a way to start looking at the project, and these then become means to catalyze, let's say, a kind of social equilibrium, right? Where these little inserts also create their own gravity, in the way that they might impact the fabric around it. So I think that's probably something that that Harris can think about.
In a sense, what you're saying is really is the architectural answer always to institutionalize care?
Yeah.
Or whether
absolutely.
One of the things that was really sensitive about the project, one of the axonometrics showed is the points where he located his entrances were continuations of existing pathways, it seemed, at least, the manner in which he drew. Now, what if there were no buildings inside the site?
Yeah.
And these were just pathways that allowed you through the site, which was maybe more of non-built, and the pathways let you into the fabric, as you were saying. Sameep, something like this.
Absolutely. No, it's unfortunately, because of the strife in Kashmir, we haven't been able to look at the architecture as as a consolidated body of knowledge, and it's a subject that requires a huge amount of work. And maybe Harris and other students like him are a beginning to make that happen. So. One is optimistic that this will be something that is more mainstream in a few years. Yeah.
But the nature that you were talking about, Sameep, is irrespective of whether it's in Kashmir or Bombay or Ahmedabad.
Absolutely,
The idea of institutionalized care versus perhaps bringing back a human scale, which means, it's a whole notion of dependency. Rather than we prioritize self-resilience to an extent that itself becomes a distancing element.
Absolutely.
There was a podcast, I think, that Chitra Vishwanath and her husband Vishwanath were having, reflecting on their own projects and practice. And Vishwanath actually brought up this question as a critique of their own practice. That he said, if all of our projects are self-reliant within their sites, in terms of food security, waste, recycling everything, one way or the other, he said, so how are we dependent on the street where our project is located? And then he sort of evoked this past leader of Singapore who said that independence in some way also builds a certain arrogance. And institutionalization and dependence actually tempers that hubris. And I think in some way that is also what you were pointing to in terms of what is the nature of this project.
Yeah.
It's important.
Great. That's lovely. So thanks guys. This is lovely. NASA, I hope we've had a lovely session with you guys. Thanks for collaborating with us. Every NASA day it's been fun. It's the second year we've done it. So thanks for calling us in, and hopefully the students have benefited from this session. We've had and we should thank Sameep and Subra both for giving us time. That's the key, right? When we have architects who are so busy to give us that time, and we really thank you again. And I hope we keep this continued discussion. So I just want to end with one slide. We had 105 entries, like we said, and entries were, we were looking at them when we analyzed them in very different forms. I mean, you can see the stats here. I don't know if it's presented on your screen. I'll just present it on the screen. If you can see it now, Yeah, these, can you all see the screen now? This is the map of India. Okay. So, I mean, we've got entries. The southern part of India is really, really engaging. They were, most of the entries came from there, close to 50%, and the western region, maybe 25% of that, and the rest of the parts of India you can see here clearly. So, those were the entries, and the nature of projects actually emerged from, some of them were issue-based, whether it's social or political. Some of them were, rooted in heritage conservation or adaptive reuse projects, program-driven projects, site-based projects, which is context or environmental projects. And you've seen some of these projects today, just 4 of them, but they cover most of these pieces. Some of them were urban rejuvenation projects, some utopian. I mean, somebody wanted to investigate Mars, for instance, and architectural theory projects also. So I think those were what we categorized them before we actually started, when we looked at them, before we actually looked at the projects, and then sort of came up with these 4 projects. So thanks a lot, guys. We're happy to conclude today's session, and stay in touch. And Nasa, if you want to conclude, and we can end the session.
Yes, yes. Can you stop sharing your screen?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. First off, I would like to thank architect Shantanu and architect Manisha for curating this whole event and for the good intentions that you guys have about educating the students. And we are glad that it aligns with our values also. And secondly, we would like to thank architect Sameep and architect Shubha for spending a valuable time in critiquing all these projects. And it was really insightful for us, and we hope those who are watching also learn a lot. And third, I would like to thank all the participants, Arjun, Kaustav, Harris, and Suhas, for putting yourselves through the jury process yet again. And I hope you guys inspired a lot of students who are watching. The main intent was for this was like a lot of students are doing their thesis right now. So when they see really good thesis, then they also get inspired. So I hope we did justice to that. And at last, I would like to thank my NASA teammates, Tarun and Hari, who helped us in coordinating this whole event. And thank you, Shruti and Eric, for joining us for the event too. And lastly, thank you for all the viewers who joined us in celebrating NASA Day together. And wish you all happy learning. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Bye, sir. Tarun, you can stop the live.
We stopped streaming.
Tarun? Okay, you guys leave, I'll take care. Oh, we are still live.